Mara Elridge had learned to recognize the sound of endings. It was in the way hospital machines softened their beeping when a nurse adjusted the volume, as if mercy could be measured in decibels. It was in the hush that crept over the ward at night, when even footsteps seemed to apologize. It was in the way people avoided looking too closely at the faces of the dying, because to see them clearly was to admit the truth: time was not a promise. Time was a loan. Mara didn't belong in this place, not as a patient, not as a nurse, not as anyone with authority. She was only here because she needed the money. The agency had called it compassionate companionship. Sit with the terminally ill. Read to them. Hold their hand. Listen. Be present so their families could sleep, shower, eat something, pretend the world still worked. Mara had applied because she couldn't afford her mother's medication and because her landlord had taped a final warning to her door. She told herself she was doing good while she was doing what she had to. Tonight, the receptionist led her down a private corridor to a room whose door was polished as if it were meant for royalty rather than suffering. "Mr. Vale," the receptionist said, lowering her voice. He requested a specific kind of company. "It's in the file." Mara held the clipboard. Her eyes snagged on a line written in crisp ink. "Special request, witness and participant in final vow." Mara blinked. Final vow. The receptionist offered a practiced smile that didn't quite hold. He's lucid. He's polite. He's also very persuasive. If you're uncomfortable, you can refuse. But he asked for you specifically. I've never met him. That's what he asked for. A stranger. A chill brushed the back of Mara's neck, and she didn't know why. Her instincts said turn around. Her bank account said open the door. She inhaled once, steadying herself, and stepped inside. The room was dim except for a lamp at the far end and the pale glow from the city outside the window. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, and underneath it, something else, like cold stone after rain. On the bed lay a man who didn't look like he belonged in a hospital any more than Mara did. He was too still, too composed, even as tubes ran from his arm and a monitor mapped his heartbeat in green spikes. His hair was black, his skin so pale it made the white sheets look dull. His face was sharp in a way that seemed sculpted rather than grown. But it was his eyes that stopped Mara. They were open. Not the glassy stare of the drugged or the fading, but a focused, unwavering gaze, dark, yes, but alive with a kind of quiet command. "You came," he said. His voice was low, nearly a whisper, yet it filled the space as if the room had been built around it. Mara held the clipboard tighter. "I'm Mara. I'm here from the agency. I know who you are." He shifted slightly, and despite the 4 lines and the weak-looking rise and fall of his chest, the movement had an eerie grace. "Thank you for agreeing." "I didn't agree to anything yet," Mara said carefully. "They told me you had a special request." A faint smile touched his mouth. "A final wish." Mara's throat tightened. "I can read to you. Or sit with you. If you need someone to call." "No," his gaze didn't waver. "I want a wife." The words hit the air like a drop of ink in water. Mara stared, waiting for the punchline. He didn't blink. "I'm sorry," she said, because the human thing to do when faced with the impossible was to apologize to it. "I think you're confused. I'm perfectly clear." He turned his head slightly, and the lamplight caught the edge of a ring lying on the bedside table, silver, heavy, carved with symbols that looked too old to belong in the modern world. I will die tonight. I can feel it in the way my heart fails. Before I go, I require a vow. Mara's pulse thudded hard in her ears. Why? His eyes softened, just a fraction. Because some contracts only accept the signature of love, or the imitation of it. Mara didn't know what to say to that. She glanced at the door, half expecting a nurse to burst in and explain this was a prank. But the hallway outside remained silent. Listen, Mara began, trying to keep her voice calm. I'm sorry for what you're going through. But I'm not, this isn't. He lifted his hand. The movement was slow, weak, but it stopped her anyway. Sit, he said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation wrapped in certainty. Against her better judgment, Mara pulled the chair closer and sat. He watched her like he was memorizing her face, as though he'd spent years imagining it would be someone else, and had accepted, at last, that it would be her. What's your name? Mara asked. A pause. Lucien Vale, he said. The name sounded like it belonged in a story Mara had once read as a child, one with castles and cursed bloodlines and moonlit promises. Do you have family? She asked. His mouth tightened. Not the kind that matters. Mara forced herself to breathe. Why me? Lucien's gaze drifted to the window, where the city lights glittered like distant stars. Because you are kind enough to say yes when you shouldn't be. Mara swallowed. You don't know me. I know what you are, he murmured. You are someone who stays. The words lodged in her chest, sharp and inexplicable. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out brittle. Even if I said yes, what, we get married in a hospital room. That's not how it works. Lucien's eyes flicked back to her. It is, if the officiant is waiting. He nodded toward the door. Mara's stomach dropped. The door opened quietly. An older man stepped in, tall, thin, dressed not in scrubs or a suit, but in something that looked like a priest's robe made from darker fabric. His hair was silver, his expression solemn. He carried a small leather-bound book. Mara stood up. Who is that? Lucien's voice was gentle. Someone who owes me a debt. The older man inclined his head to Mara, eyes sharp as glass. Miss Elridge. Mara's skin prickled. How do you know my name? The man ignored the question and looked to Lucien. Are you certain, my lord? My lord. Mara stared at Lucien. Lucien's eyelids fluttered, a brief tremor crossing his face. For the first time, he looked truly sick. I am out of time, he said. Then he looked at Mara again. Please. The word didn't fit him. It was too human. Mara felt something shift inside her, a familiar pressure. It was the same pressure she'd felt when she signed up for this job, when she took overtime, when she promised her mother everything would be okay. The pressure of being the person who says yes. What do you want from me? Mara asked. Lucien lifted his hand again, palm up. Your hand. Your voice. Your vow. Mara's throat tightened. And what do I get? Lucien's smile was faint, almost sad. Whatever you wish. Money, she said before she could stop herself. The word tasted ugly in her mouth. Lucian didn't flinch. Yes. Mara's cheeks burned. I didn't mean. I asked for honesty, he murmured. Not purity. Her heart hammered. This was absurd. This was wrong. But it wasn't dangerous in the way she'd always imagined danger. It was dangerous like a door you shouldn't open because you might find out what's behind it. Is this legal? Mara asked, looking at the older man. It is binding, he replied. Not legal. Binding. Mara looked back at Lucian. You going to die? Yes, Lucian said. And you will live. The way he said it sounded like a promise and a warning. Mara's hands shook. Why does it matter if you're married when you die? Lucian's eyes darkened. Because I made a contract 1,000 years ago, and it demands a queen. Mara laughed, once, sharply, because the alternative was to scream. 1,000 years ago? Lucian's expression didn't change. I am older than you can imagine. Mara took a step back. Okay. Okay, you're hallucinating. This is, maybe the medication. I have no medication, Lucian said softly. Mara's mouth opened, then closed again. The older man stepped forward, voice low and formal. Miss Elridge, you may leave. You may refuse. No one will chase you down the hallway. But if you stay, you must understand this is not play acting. A vow spoken here will be heard elsewhere. Mara looked at the ring on the table. The symbols seemed to twist when she stared too long, as if her eyes couldn't quite keep them still. She thought of her mother's trembling hands around an empty pill bottle. She thought of the envelope on her door. She thought of how tired she was of being powerless. If I do this, Mara said, voice unsteady, and it's real, if it's some weird contract, will it hurt anyone? Lucian's gaze held hers. It will hurt you. Mara's breath caught. Lucian continued, softer now. But I will not harm those you love. I swear it. Something in Mara recognized the weight of his words, not as manipulation, but as oath. She didn't know why she believed him. Maybe because he looked like someone who had never begged for anything before, and the fact that he was begging now made it feel final. Mara sat back down, because her knees had started to shake. Okay, she whispered. Okay. We can, fine. We can do it. Lucian exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding his breath for centuries. The older man opened the book. Stand, he said. Mara stood beside the bed. The older man took the ring and held it out. It was cold enough to sting when it touched Mara's skin. Lucian's hand found hers, cool, but not dead. His fingers curled around her with surprising strength. The officiant spoke words Mara didn't recognize. The syllables weren't Latin, weren't any language she'd heard, yet they pulled at the air like hooks. Mara's scalp tingled. The lights flickered. What is this? Mara whispered. Lucian's eyes never left her face. It's too late to be afraid now. The officiant nodded to Mara. Repeat after me. Mara swallowed. I don't know what I'm saying. You will, Lucian said. The officiant began, and Mara repeated, the words thick and strange on her tongue. I vow by blood and breath, by darkness and dawn. Her voice trembled, but the room seemed to listen. Lucien's grip tightened, and Mara felt a pulse, not her own, throb faintly against her skin. The officiant's voice dropped lower. "And do you accept the crown that follows this vow?" Mara's stomach lurched. "Crown?" Lucien's lips parted, as if he might stop it, but he didn't. He only whispered, "Please." Mara didn't know what she was accepting. She didn't know what she was becoming. But she knew what it meant to carry someone's last hope. "I accept," she said. The moment the words left her mouth, the ring flared hot, white hot, then snapped cold again. Mara gasped. Lucien's eyes widened slightly, as if he'd felt it too. His mouth parted, and for a heartbeat, he looked almost relieved. The officiant spoke the final line, and the air in the room shifted, heavy as a storm cloud. "Then it is sealed." Lucien's hand slipped from Mara's grasp. His eyes fluttered. The monitor's beeping changed, fast, frantic. "Lucien?" Mara leaned forward. Hey, no." His gaze found hers one last time, sharp and impossibly clear. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. Then the line on the screen flattened. A long, steady tone filled the room. Mara stared, frozen, as nurses rushed in. Hands pushed her aside, voices blurred, someone asked her questions she couldn't answer. She stepped back and back until her shoulders hit the wall. A wife. For 5 minutes. For a vow she didn't understand. For a contract she didn't believe. The older officiant closed his book with a soft thud and looked at Mara with something like pity. "It's done," he said. Mara's lips moved, but no sound came. "It's done," he repeated, and this time his voice carried a finality that made Mara's skin crawl. "May the night receive you kindly, my queen." "My what?" Mara rasped. But the room was already moving away from her, as if she were no longer relevant. And then the world dimmed at the edges. Not like fainting. Not like sleep. Like something reaching from the dark and pulling her under. Mara woke to silence. No machines. No fluorescent lights. No city noise. Her eyes snapped open. Above her was stone, black stone veined with silver, carved into arches. The air was cold and smelled of earth and old incense. She tried to sit up. Her body felt different. Lighter. Sharper. As if her bones had been rewired. She was lying on a slab. A tomb. Her breath caught, then steadied, not ragged with fear but smooth, controlled, too controlled. She lifted a hand to her throat. Her pulse. She couldn't feel it. Mara swung her legs off the slab, bare feet touching icy ground. She wore a gown, deep red, heavy fabric, nothing like the clothes she'd worn to the hospital. Her fingers brushed her left hand. The ring was there. The symbols seemed clearer now, less like a blur and more like a language her skin understood. A whisper slid through the chamber, too soft to be sound yet loud enough to make her bones ache. "Welcome, Queen." Mara turned toward the voice. Shadows gathered at the edge of the chamber, and figures stepped forward, men and women dressed in black, faces pale, eyes gleaming like coins caught in moonlight. They bowed. One of them, tall, blonde, beautiful in a way that felt predatory, lifted his head and smiled. "Your Majesty," he said. "You're finally awake." Mara's mouth went dry. "Where am I?" The blonde man's smile widened as if she'd asked something amusing. "You are in the Undercourt," he said. "And you are bound." Mara backed away until her spine hit stone. "Bound to what?" His eyes flicked to the ring. Then to her throat. Then back to her face. "Bound to King Lucian Vale," he said softly, "for the remainder of his reign." Mara's mind reeled. "He's dead." The courtier's smile turned into something colder. "Oh, no," he said. "He merely shed his human sickness." He stepped closer, voice dropping like a blade sliding from its sheath. "Our king is not dead, Your Majesty. He is coming." And from somewhere deep in the darkness beyond the chamber, Mara heard it. A slow, steady heartbeat. Not hers. Not human. Coming closer. The heartbeat grew louder the farther Mara tried to get away from it. It wasn't like a sound in the air. It was inside the stone, inside the floor beneath her feet, inside her. Each thud carried a pressure that tightened around her ribs as if her body remembered that rhythm better than it remembered her own name. The pale figures remained bowed, motionless, like statues that had learned to breathe. Only the blonde man stood upright, watching Mara with a patient amusement that made her feel like prey being allowed a head start. Mara backed along the wall, fingertips scraping the cold, black stone. "If this is a kidnapping," she said, voice shaking, "I don't have money. I told him I'd do it for money, but I don't." The blonde man tilted his head. "For money," he repeated, tasting the phrase as though it were wine. "How wonderfully human." "Answer me," Mara snapped, surprised by the bite in her own voice. Fear sat in her stomach, but something else sat on top of it, an unfamiliar steadiness, as if panic had found the door locked. The blonde man's eyes flicked to the ring on her hand. "You already know the answer. You married our king." "I married a dying man in a hospital room." "You married a king," he corrected smoothly, "in exile." Mara's mind snagged on the word. Exile from what? Before he could answer, the chamber's shadows shifted as if the darkness itself stepped aside. A figure emerged from the corridor beyond, and every vampire in the room lowered their heads further, a synchronized bow of absolute submission. Lucian Vale walked into the chamber like he owned every breath in it. He was not the man from the hospital bed. He looked the same, black hair, pale skin, that sharp sculpted face, but all weakness had been burned out of him. His posture was straight, his movements unhurried. His eyes were darker than Mara remembered, not merely brown or black but something like night water reflecting no stars. He stopped a few paces from her. Mara's throat tightened. "You're alive," Lucian said. She took a step back on instinct. "I saw you die." Lucian's gaze lowered briefly to the ring on her finger, then rose back to her face. "You saw my heart stop. Isn't that for a human?" His voice held the faintest edge of humor, but it didn't warm him. "Yes. For me, it was a door." Mara's stomach churned. "Where am I?" Lucian's eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "Home. My home is a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat," Mara said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "My mother is." "I know," Lucian said, cutting her off gently. "And she will be cared for." Mara froze. "Don't you dare." Lucian lifted his hand slightly, palm out, not a threat. An oath-like gesture. "I swore I would not harm those you love." I meant it. Your mother will have her medication. Your rent will be paid. Your life above ground will be handled. Above ground. Mara's eyes darted to the bowed figures, to the stone arches, to the darkness that seemed to have weight. You're vampires. The word felt ridiculous and childish, and yet it fit too perfectly, sliding into place like the last piece of a nightmare puzzle. Lucian didn't flinch from it. Yes. Mara laughed once, sharp and strained. And I'm what? You're a queen? A ripple moved through the bowed court, something between discomfort and fascination, as if they'd been waiting for her to say it out loud. Lucian's gaze held hers. You are my wife. Mara's hand flew up to the ring. It felt heavier now, as if the metal had learned gravity in this place. I didn't know. You tricked me. No, Lucian said, and for the first time there was something like regret in his tone. I asked you in the only way I was allowed to ask. Allowed? Mara echoed. Lucian's jaw tightened. There are laws older than your cities. Older than your religions. I made a contract 1,000 years ago to keep my kingdom from being devoured by its rivals. Mara's mouth went dry. Your kingdom. The Undercourt, Lucian said, gesturing faintly around them. A hidden realm beneath the living world. A court of the night. The blonde vampire smiled as if he were enjoying a play. Lucian didn't look at him, but his voice sharpened slightly. Enough, Alaric. So that was his name. Alaric bowed with theatrical grace. My king. Mara's eyes narrowed. Who is he? Lucian answered without looking away from her. A lord of my court. A man who has waited a very long time for me to fail. Alaric placed a hand over his chest. How flattering to be seen so clearly. Mara's fear twisted into anger, a lifeline, something she could hold on to. You all acting like this is normal. Lucian's gaze flicked briefly across the bowed court. It is normal here. It's not normal to marry a stranger, Mara said. It's not normal to wake up in a crypt. It's a sanctum, someone murmured from the bowing crowd. Mara snapped her head toward the voice, and the speaker, a woman with white hair braided down her back, bowed deeper, as if apologizing for speaking. Lucian's attention returned to Mara. Come, he said quietly. You need to see what you are bound to. Mara didn't move. Am I dead? Lucian hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Mara's stomach dropped. Am I? No, Lucian said, but the word came out carefully placed. Not in the way you mean. Your heart still beats. Your body still breathes. But the contract. The contract did something to me, Mara finished, voice rising. Lucian's eyes darkened. Yes. Mara looked down at her hands. The skin looked the same. But when she focused, truly focused, she realized she could see more detail than she should, the fine ridges of her fingerprints, the faint blue threads of veins beneath her wrist, the way shadows between her knuckles weren't just darkness but layers of it. She swallowed hard. What did it do? Lucian stepped closer, slow enough not to startle her. It marked you as mine. Mara's laugh came out broken. That's not an answer. Lucian's gaze flicked to her throat. Do you feel it? Mara touched the side of her neck. A strange warmth pulsed there, not quite pain, not quite pressure, like the memory of teeth. Her hand jerked away. You. I did not feed from you, Lucian said immediately. Not then. Not ever. Not unless you choose it. Mara stared at him, chest heaving though she didn't feel out of breath. So what happened to me? Lucian's voice dropped. The vow made you a vessel for the crown. A vessel, Mara repeated, disgusted. Like a container. Alaric's smile widened. More like a key. Lucian's head turned a fraction, dangerously controlled. Alaric. Alaric lifted both hands innocently. Forgive me. But she deserves truth, does she not? Or do we begin her reign with another sweet lie? The court remained bowed, but Mara could feel their attention like fingertips on her skin. They were listening the way wolves listen to footsteps. Mara forced herself to stand straight. Tell me the truth. Lucian held her gaze, and for a moment she saw something ancient behind his eyes. Weariness layered over power. 1,000 years ago, he said, I was king in the open. The vampire courts warred constantly. We fed recklessly. We were hunted. We hunted back. It was chaos. He glanced around the chamber as if remembering it filled with blood and fire. To end it, Lucian continued, I signed a contract with the first archivist. The one in the hospital, Mara whispered. Lucian nodded. A keeper of old laws. He offered peace, structure, in exchange for a binding. Mara's ring seemed to tighten around her finger, a phantom pressure. What binding? Lucian's voice was calm, but each word felt like it had been carved from stone. That every 1,000 years, my crown would require a human bride. Mara stared. Why? To remind the court, Lucian said, that we cannot fully sever ourselves from humanity without becoming beasts. Alaric's voice slid in. And to ensure the crown is never purely vampire. Never purely ours. Lucian ignored him. The contract keeps the Undercourt concealed. It dampens our hunger. It binds our lords to laws. Without it, the courts would fracture and rise, and the living world would become a feeding ground again. Mara's hands curled into fists. So I'm a leash. Lucian's jaw tightened, and there it was, the smallest flash of something like shame. You are a safeguard. I didn't agree to be a safeguard, Mara said, voice trembling. I agreed to a dying man's wish. Lucian's eyes lowered. I know. Silence fell between them, thick and cold. Then Mara said, quietly, can I leave? Every vampire in the room seemed to go stiller, as if the question itself was a blade hovering in the air. Lucian's gaze rose again. Not yet. Mara's throat tightened. Not yet. Lucian's voice remained controlled, but his honesty cut. The contract binds you to this realm until it recognizes you as queen. I'm already queen, Mara said bitterly. Your people are calling me that. Alaric's smile turned sharp. Titles spoken are not the same as titles accepted. Lucian's eyes flicked to Alaric at last, cold enough to frost stone. You will not challenge her. Alaric bowed. I would never. But his eyes said, I absolutely will. Lucian turned back to Mara. There is a rite, he said. A coronation. Until it happens, you are in transition. Neither fully protected nor fully free. Mara's stomach rolled. Transition into what? Lucien hesitated again, too brief for anyone else to notice, but Mara noticed it because she was watching him like her life depended on it. Into the queen the contract designed, Lucien said. Mara whispered, a vampire queen. The words tasted wrong, like trying to speak someone else's destiny. Lucien's expression didn't soften. Not a full vampire. Not unless you choose it. Alaric chuckled. Choice? How charming. Mara shot Alaric a glare. Do you ever shut up? Alaric's brows rose with delight. I hope not.